All right, Bismillah. So for this last sort of this last video, we'll talk about how to name acids, right, including oxy acids. So we have talked about inorganic compounds or ionic compounds. We have talked about how to name molecular compounds. We have talked about how to name oxoanions, and in this lecture, in this video, we'll talk about how to name acids, which are oxyacids. So what we're talking about are things like how do you name things like HCl if it is in aqueous as an acid? How do you name HNO3 if it is an aqueous, and so on and so forth, right? So we'll talk about these guys. This would be hydrochloric acid here. This would be nitric acid. All right. So we'll talk about how to name these acids. Now, the basic rule is this: if you look at the anion, right? So if the anion is ending with IDE, then all you have to do is you add the word hydro, and the ide becomes ic, right? So you add hydroic acid. So if it is HCl, you look at the chloride part. Cl is chloride, so basically you say hydro, and the chloride becomes chloric, and you say acid. So HCl would be hydrochloric acid. Likewise, if you have an anion ending with 8, it becomes ic and acid. If you have the anion ending with ite, it becomes us as an acid. So for example, let's delete that. So if you look at, for example, chlorate, so you have chlorate. If you add an H to it, like HClO3, it becomes, the H becomes ic, it becomes chloric acid. If you have perchlorate, it becomes perchloric acid. So essentially all you're doing is changing 8, right? So you're changing the 8 to ic, and that is all that you're doing here. So again, you're changing the 8 part to ic. Likewise, if you have chlorite, which is shown here, right? So if you have chlorite, and then the chlorite becomes chloric acid, as shown here. For example, the chlorite becomes chlorous acid. Hypochlorite becomes hypochlorous acid. Shown here in this slide. Again, if the anion and the acid ends with ide, change the ending to ic, and then you add the prefix hydro. So for example, you have HBr as an aqueous acid, it becomes hydrobromic acid, and hydroiodic acid, and so on and so forth. All right. If the anion of the acid ends with 8, you simply change it to ic. So for example, if I say, well, how about this guy? How about NO3 with an H? So HNO3, and we know this NO3 is nitrate, right? So that's the anion, right? This guy will be the nitrate. But if you have an H attached to it, it would become simply nitric acid. So the whole thing is this whole thing, nitric acid, right? Likewise, if you have an anion of the acid ending with ite becomes us. So if you have chlorus, it becomes chlorite, it becomes chlorous acid, right? So for example, if I say, how about this guy here, HBRO2? Well, in this case, you look at the anion, BRO2 minus, so BRO2 minus, right? So this guy, so BO2 minus would be, move it up a little bit and see if it actually works. It's not moving. Okay, so BR2 minus is bromide, right? And so the ite becomes us. This will be called bromous acid. So you say this guy will be called bromous acid. Alright, I hope this helps, and this is the end of the naming nomenclature part of chapter 2. Good luck.